Welcome back, and a very special welcome to our next guest. His name is Representative Chuck Owens. He is a member of the House of Representatives in Louisiana. He has, to his credit, taken point on what I hope will become a national initiative. It certainly is required at the state level as well as at the federal level. And we're going to talk with him a bit about the Chinese Communist Party, the threat that he believes it represents, as do I, to our country, to our people, to our freedoms, and why he has taken an initiative now adopted by both the House and Senate in Louisiana to warn of that danger and urge corrective action on the part of our country. Representative Owens, it's terrific to have you with us, sir. Thank you so much for joining us and for your leadership in this respect. Tell us about it.
Well, thank you for having me, Mr. Gaffney. It's an honor to be with you and to meet you.
Thank you. The honor is mine, truly.
Um,
So, what was the thrust of this legislative initiative? Tell us where it stands at the moment, and the thinking that went into its adoption by you and your colleagues.
well, I'm a third year lawmaker in Louisiana. I'm a first termer. I'm a retired military officer, native here in Louisiana. I was going through some old legislation last summer, and I became aware that in the 60s, the good people of the state of Louisiana had identified the USSR as the primary enemy of the United States and the people of Louisiana. And they went to great lengths to specify why we were concerned with the Soviets in those days. Some of the law turned out to be bad law. There were some association tests and things like that were very much old think in the 60s and are gone now. With the Soviet Union gone, it occurred to me no one has stood up and said this type of thing against our current set of enemies. And it's not always a state feeling thing to do, but I said, it was done before. There's no reason not to. So I crafted a similar piece of legislation as opposed to a law. We've done a concurrent resolution that basically identifies the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China as the primary, most imminent threat to the United States of America and the state of Louisiana. And the resolution asks the president and the Congress to take positive, proactive action to defend us from what they're up to. The, um, the, the resolution speaks of the atrocities that go on inside of China. I made the point from the floor of the House that what they do inside their borders is their business, but it needs to be spoken in public how cruel they are, how poorly they treat people of all types. I spoke of what they're doing to Uyghurs. I spoke of how they treat people of color, how they treat homosexuals, just the terrible things that go on inside of China as a bellwether saying this is who they are. And they're exporting this type of thing around the world. I drill down in the document about their predatory trade practices, how they infiltrate universities, how they infiltrate government. And I spoke on the floor about how if a company is in business with a company, if a U.S. company is in business with a company from China, then all their data is shared with CCP. And this is dangerous. It is dangerous on so many fronts, and nobody wants to talk about it. I am told, and I have heard that there are a lot of American elected officials who are beholden to those folks. I'm not one of them at all. And so I think it needs to be spoken because, Frank, you and I are old enough to remember how dangerous the Soviet Union was. And we're also old enough to remember when the Soviet Union fell, some well meaning, even Republicans thought, well, peace is going to break out. Things are going to be okay. So we started to disarm. And we've disarmed significantly over the last 30 years. When I went into the Air Force in 1986, we had 650,000 people. I think they have 300 now. The Army went from 20 divisions down to about 8. We are disarmed, and the Chinese have been building over decades, and they are a looming threat that we need to be prepared for on many fronts.
Well, you couldn't be more right about all of that, it seems to me. And I'm always of the mind that any country that treats its own people this horribly is not going to be terribly kind towards us or anybody else for that matter. And that's certainly true of the Chinese. As you say, they're exporting, among other things, their whole social credit system, data enabled oppressive technique, and it's the China model. And some of that is here now as a result of all the COVID business, and it's a very, very ominous portent of things to come. I think it's absolutely true. I wanted to come back to something you touched on, though, that we addressed in a webinar from our Committee on the Present Danger China yesterday. And I want to commend it to our audience. The video of it should be up, I would guess, in the next day or so at presentdangerchina.org. It was about elite capture. It was about the phenomenon of what the Chinese have done to inexorably get their sort of claws into elites of various kinds. Academics, yes. The Hollywood types, yes. Media personalities, yes. But especially business leaders, and now an awful lot of politicians as well. It becomes clear. And so I'm struck. It took somebody like yourself with a military background and appreciation of just how serious this threat is on so many different levels. It's really unrestricted warfare in practice. It's what they call it in China. And the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is the force behind it all. So when you look at this and the kind of response you got from your colleagues, I guess it's heartening that you did not find an awful lot of elite captured individuals in the Louisiana legislature willing to stand up and resist this. Did you, in fact, run into more of that opposition than you've suggested so far, or just got below the radar?
I didn't run into any, so I don't know if they just don't know who I am or don't care. When I brought this bill to the floor of the House, this resolution, one of my colleagues asked me a question. He said, "Okay, I get what you're doing." He said, "But if the Chinese go into Taiwan, do you think the United States should be involved?" And of course, that's always the weird, ambiguous question. And my response to him is, we need to be responsive to anyone we have a defense agreement with, and I know that's a gray zone there. And then it bleeds over into the question of Russia, Ukraine, about who we're obliged to. I am not an isolationist, but I am a person who believes in living by his word. So if we have an obligation to someone, that's one thing. But that was the only pushback I got. I was told that I would get pushback from business leaders because a lot of business goes on here in Louisiana with the Red Chinese. We have a lot of back and forth agreements with them. We buy a lot from them. We sell a lot to them, but no one said a word to me about it. So which puzzles me. Like I said, it may be because I'm a first termer, and maybe they don't want to take me seriously. But the words have been spoken. The document is being readied, and the Secretary of State is going to transmit this to Washington in the near future.
Terrific.
So the words are now out there.
Well, and more importantly, in a way, the model for other legislators around the country to do the same is now out there. And maybe it's the fact that it's a resolution and it's not binding and it won't compel action by the state is a clever finesse that would, reduce the resistance that you might otherwise have gotten. But it sounds to me as though it's a very, very sensible and long overdue, as you say, response to an enemy that is, if anything, vastly more dangerous than the Soviet Union was back in the day. And you mentioned, the resolutions that this is modeled after. That were needed for the Soviets, it's vastly more needed in this case, I think.
It is the level and the type of their threat is so much more dynamic than the Soviets. Well, I mean, the Soviets were literally coming at us with hammers. They had the massive nuclear arsenal, they had the massive army, but they did not have the finesse of the Chinese in terms of being able to infiltrate important elements of our society. The Soviets fell because they went bankrupt. The Chinese have seen this and they have done something else. They have this state-sponsored capitalism that lures people in who need and or want the money. And that's what people told me I was going to get pushback from, was from the business people who are so in love with this money that the Chinese give them. And I didn't get that question. And quite frankly, I don't want their money if it comes with any strings. No one in the United States should want their money if it comes with any strings. You mentioned earlier, Mr. Gaffney, about the social credit scores. I mean, that is obviously going on here. It is going on in a surreptitious way through social media, and there's discussions of it happening elsewhere. We need to stand firm and speak of it now.
Amen. Well, let me just say that, as you look at this sort of agenda, it's no accident, comrade, as the Soviets used to say, that the Chinese took away from, well, not just the bankruptcy of the Soviet Union, but how it was brought about. And that was by my old boss, Ronald Reagan, who very deliberately set about cutting off their cash flow. And the Chinese, under Deng Xiaoping, made it a priority to integrate with our economy in so many different ways to elite capture, yes, but also just create these codependencies that would make that exceedingly difficult for us to do again. And so, while I think disengagement is definitely the order of the day, we're not seeing it as one of the things that's in prospect at the moment. Representative Owens, I am so appreciative of your leadership on this effort and want to thank you for taking point on it, something we expect of our military personnel always. God bless you, sir, and keep up the great work. Come back to us if you would with updates on how it's going there in Louisiana and as we take this effort, hopefully nationwide. We'll be right back with more right after a very brief commercial message that helps make this program possible. Stay tuned.